Hello. Okay, we had some technical difficulties. We're a couple minutes late. Sorry about that. But let's start off with our. Why is the screen look different to me today? That's okay. That'll work, right? That'll work, sure. So let's start with our prayers, and then yeah, we'll go from there. Christ is risen from the dead, by death trampling down on death, and to those in the tombs he has granted life. Shine within our hearts, let it master the pure light of divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may understand the message of your gospel teachings. Instill within us also the fear of your blessed commandments, having trampled upon carnal desires. We enter into a spiritual way of living, both thinking and doing only those things well pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, our sanctification, illumination, do we give glory together, Father, without beginning, all good life in the Spirit, now and forever in the age of ages. Amen. Very good. Welcome. We've got some people here, but here I'm going to give you the treat. Let me see if I can make this work. Think electronics will actually talk to each other. Where do we go? Plays up there. Uh-oh. There you can see it. There you go. And right there, that's right there. That's Zach. You gotta wait for the dance break, though. You totally can't see it. Oh, there you go. Yeah, he's graduating from kindergarten, which is very important. We're gonna wait for the dance break. I hope it comes soon because I'm wasting time. There it is, dance break. We're doing fancy moves. There you go. All right, anyway. So there you go. I know, it's silly. I'm a dork. I'm a dork who loves my little boy. He did good. All right, now we're ready for Bible study. Bum, bum, bum. Good. Okay, so with that important point of business out of the way, can you run around to the thermometer thingy, whatever you call it, and turn it down to 72? It's probably up at like 81 right now because it's awfully warm in here. Thermostat. You see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. All right, we better jump right in because this is a fairly thick passage with lots to talk about and to go through. And I do want to get through chapters 24 and 25 today. And we'll be able to pick up some speed there, but it's important that we kind of sit on. This is actually called, a lot of people call it the Olivet Discourse. It's on the Mount of Olives, but it's also the fifth discourse. And so it is talking about the end of times, eschatology, to use fancy theological terms. I know, thank you, Mary Jo. She said she liked the video, good. So remember, and just to kind of keep this in mind because it's been a while since we talked about it, but there's Matthew collects artificially, so he takes things that Jesus said in different contexts and he brings them together and he makes discourses out of them. And you can see that from looking at the other Gospels, and you can kind of find the parallels, and you find out, well, he said this then, he said this here. And Matthew kind of collects them together to create these 5 long discourses. And the reason he does that is very purposeful. Because remember, Matthew's writing to a Semitic audience. So they're the Jewish Christians, those people who are raised Jewish that then recognize Jesus as the Messiah, and they became Christians, but they still have a Semitic mindset, so they think in those terms. And the great lawgiver in Jewish faith is Moses. And Moses gave 5 books. So he gave the Pentateuch or the Torah, depending on which term you want to use. So when Matthew is showing that Jesus is not the new Moses so much as Moses is a type of Jesus, in other words, that he points to Jesus, just because Jesus, we've talked about this, so I don't want to go into it too much, but just because Jesus comes after Moses doesn't mean that Moses is primary to Jesus, because Jesus, of course, is a pre-existing word, and his incarnation might happen in time, but it ripples forward and backward. And part of the way it ripples backwards is it sets up these prototypes. So you have Joseph, the comely Joseph, so Joseph went to Egypt. You have Isaac on the mountain with Abraham being sacrificed. You have and of course, large is Moses. You had Moses as the great lawgiver. He gave the 5 books. So Matthew collects those things so that this resonates in the minds of his Jewish audience. So they go, oh, yeah, of course, Jesus is the new Moses, or the fulfillment of Moses is probably the best way to talk about it. So he completes all this. So this is a final discourse, the 5th one. And it's been set up as Christ, as we talked about last week, is Christ is teaching in the temple. So he's coming to Jerusalem. We've had Palm Sunday. He's there in the temple. He's cleansed the outer court of the Gentiles. He sent all the money changers away, and he begins to teach about the kingdom and about true faith and all these other things that we talk about. And the authorities, the temple authorities, start getting upset. The Meshapali have arrived. Hello, Meshapali. The authorities start getting upset because he threatens their status quo, and they've got a good status quo. So they start saying, by what authority do you do this? He says, well, you answer my question, I'll answer yours. They can't answer his question, and on and on and on. And then they come with all these, what they call disputes or controversy. When Jesus tells them, that with the coin to Caesar and all these other things. And then he gives this set of woes that we talked about last week, where he's saying that you're trying to hold on to your position. You're not actually seeking after truth. If you're seeking after truth, you would see me, you would recognize me, I'm here. But instead, you've chosen to hold on to your power. Let's see if I can change that. There we go. And so that's where we are. So he's had all of these the arguments, the controversies with the authorities, and kind of sent them away. And so now he leaves the temple. He's going away. His disciples talk to him, and that's the occasion for him to begin this. So let's jump right in. So chapter 24, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So in the ancient world, the temple was one of the ancient wonders of the world, because that was long before. But it was considered one of the most beautiful buildings in the ancient world. It was made out of white, was marble in white material, so it glowed in the sun. It had gilded, it had gold gilded all over it. It was beautiful. It was stunning. And so people looked at that and they saw the beauty of it. And for the Jews, of course, the temple would withstand through all time because it was the house of God, and God is eternal, therefore his house would last forever. But in the prophets, if you go back to it, you actually hear them saying that the temple will be destroyed if Israel is not faithful to their Lord. And of course, it happened a couple times. They rebuilt. It happened a couple times rebuilt. But this was the temple called the Herodian temple, the temple of Herod, because he had it kind of expanded and fixed. But it was beautiful. And for a Jew to say, well, this, and you hear it in a couple chapters when they finally bring the charge against him. They say, well, he said that he'd tear down the temple, and then have it rebuilt in 3 days. And so that would have been a shocking thing to them. So to start this off, they're saying, look at this beautiful temple. It's going to be around forever. Look how beautiful it is. And this is going to be ours. Maybe that's the back of their minds. You don't know. And Jesus says, oh, no. That temple is going to be utterly destroyed. There won't be one stone left upon another stone, which actually comes true. When the Romans destroyed the temple, they literally did not leave one stone on another. They knocked the whole thing down. So this, of course, sets up this discourse, because he says, oh, no, that temple's going to be pulled down. Well, to a Jew who knew the prophecies and knew the Old Testament, okay, so wait a second. You're saying that the temple will be destroyed, but we know the temple's only going to be destroyed at the end times, and the Messiah is going to come, and he's going to set things right, and he'll judge the nations, and that whole domino process would take place. So, of course, it inspires the disciples to say, okay, well, what's going to happen? So they're asking 3 questions. And it's really important that we keep each of these 3 questions in mind, or we're going to go off into some really weird places. And these passages, the reason I'm setting them up so carefully is because these passages are abused all the time. You get things like the rapture out of this. You get things like all kinds of end-time speculation. That's not at all what these passages are about. They, of course, can be taken that way, but only if they're stripped from their context and we don't understand what's going on. Actually, one of the ways of reading it is a little bit hard even for me, and I'm not sure I buy it, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So what happens is the disciples come and they say, wait a second, you said the temple's going to be destroyed. Well, we've got 3 questions. The first question is when? When is the temple going to be destroyed? The second question that's prompted by that is when the temple's destroyed is when the Messiah will come in power. So when are you coming in power? How will we know that you've arrived in power? And the third thing is when the Messiah arrives in power, he's going to establish the new kingdom, the age to come. So how are we going to know when the close of the age is? So when is the temple going to be destroyed? When? How will we know that you've arrived in power? And when is the close of this age? When will this period of history be put to an end? Now, we have to be careful with that too, because those questions sound the way that one of the commentators put it, it's like a symphony. You know, they're all playing at the same time, but you can also pull each one of those out and look at the music for the oboe and the violin and the drum or whatever it is. You can look at them apart and you put them together. So we need to peel them apart because each of these he's going to answer distinctly. Okay, so the first one is the thing about the temple. So as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, so now there's not crowds around, saying, "Tell us, when will this be?" So you see the questions. When will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming in the close of the age? You see the three questions right there? So I'm not just making them up. Okay. And the close of the age is the birth of the Messianic kingdom. And you're going to hear that image when he says these are all just the birth pangs. So that's what we're talking about. So and the word, the sign of your coming is parousia, which is the word that we use. The parousia is the word we use for second coming. You have to be careful because he probably didn't have the idea of his second coming in mind here. They have the idea of him being enthroned as Messiah and King of all things. So it's probably, you have to be careful with this though, it's probably more likely that Matthew has in mind the ascension rather than the second coming. That's not to say he doesn't, he's not talking about the second coming, but primary in what he's writing is Christ ascending into heaven to be seated right hand of the Father and be enthroned as King of all creation, of all ages. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Okay, because we're about to dive in. And Jesus answered them, "Take heed that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ." And maybe not my name, Jesus, but maybe my name, Messiah. Okay, so they'll come in with my identity. They'll be identity thieves. "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet." Okay, so there's going to be all kinds of and if you look at the prophets, they talk about wars and earthquakes and all kinds of agitation and nation is nation, kingdom is kingdom, we're going to say. And so the Jews would have seen those as the kind of the precursors for the coming of the Messiah. And what Jesus is saying is yes, but it's not going to be immediate. You think it's going to all happen right at one moment and boom, it's all going to be done, but it's going to be spread out. So what you thought was going to be a musical chord is actually going to be three distinct notes played one after the other. It must take place, the end is not yet. "For nation will rise against nation, the kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, but all this is the beginning of the birth pangs." So just as a woman has to suffer as she gives birth, this is the labor. So all these things, the famines, the earthquakes. And by the way, what he has in mind, and what we have to keep in mind, is the destruction. And so that's 40 years after his crucifixion and resurrection and rising to the right hand of the Lord, of God as Lord. So here we have these signs that he's putting out, and they all actually historically came to pass. We know that. There were famines, leading up to Rome's destruction of Jerusalem. There were earthquakes. There were wars and rumors of wars, kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation. All these things happened. So he's preparing them for that. But he's saying, look, that's not going to be it. Don't get too excited. "And then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away, betray one another, and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray." So you have these false prophets again. "And because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So the problem that he's trying to set his disciples up for right now is you need to be able to read the signs of the times so that you don't get led astray and get confused. And so when all these people, which is a huge irony, because there's a major cottage industry of trying to predict the end times, and this is going to happen, and it's because Israel was made a nation this time, blah, blah, blah. And people work this out and get Bible codes and all kinds of complex theories and everything. And what Jesus is saying is don't get caught up in all that stuff. The wars aren't going to be the end. The persecutions aren't going to be the end. But when they come, know that the end is near and endure to the end. Because if you start going off on a wild hare and chasing some of these rumors, you're going to end up being led astray. So just be faithful, hang tight, and wait. You don't have to figure out when the Messiah comes. It will be completely clear and obvious. There's not going to be any doubt, any confusion. He's not coming in secret. He's not coming in the woods. He will be there. And this is important because they actually had messianic pretenders in the woods, in the desert, saying, okay, let's go take out Rome now, and I'm going to call, and the angels will come with us. And of course, they end up getting slaughtered because they're false prophets. But all this happened historically too. And then the end will come. So after all these things. So remember the three questions. When will the temple be destroyed? When will you be enthroned as Messiah? And when will the close of the stage be? So the first one he's going to answer first off. So when you see the desolating sacrilege or the blasphemy of desolation or something like that, it's a play on words. There was a Semitic deity called Baal. I got to look at it. Shamin, which is the Lord of Heaven. And Antiochus, the fourth Epiphanes, actually put a rock on the altar in the temple and said, you're going to worship this rock as the Lord of Heaven. And of course, that was what Daniel was talking about in his prophecy. And so he talked about this desolating sacrilege being set up, but then it was also known it would happen again, and that would be the sign for the end of the age. So the fall of the temple. The temple would be destroyed after this desolating sacrilege. So that almost happened in 40 AD, just a decade after Christ. Is the emperor wanted to put up a statue of himself in the temple just to thumb his nose at the Jews. But he was assassinated before that happened. But then in AD 70, you get the Roman standards are all placed up in the temple courts and everything else like that. And so, of course, it's a desolating sacrilege. So anyway, he's given him the sign. He said, you want to know when the temple is going to be destroyed, go look at Daniel. And by the way, in the first century Palestine, Daniel was a really popular book. Everybody was reading Daniel, trying to figure out, they talked about it and everything else. It was like a big deal. So they would have all known all these images. And you have, the statue that started off gold and became lead, and then there was clay feet, and then it fell apart. And all these images which showed up in Matthew. Then there's also this image of the Son of Man coming on the clouds is part of Daniel. It's Daniel chapter 12 or 15 or something like that. But anyway, they would have had all this apocalyptic imagery in their head. They wouldn't have had to think about it. It was just kind of what they were talking about. It'd be like us quoting Star Wars. Everybody's kind of part of popular culture right now. Daniel was popular culture at that point. So when he starts saying, okay, that you want to know when the temple's going to fall, go read Daniel. And Daniel talks about all these things. So he says, as Daniel has written. So when you see a desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Because he can't say it's, Rome is the desolating sacrilege, because then, the Romans are going to want to let him write his book anymore. So standing, the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea. So now he's saying you're the canary in the mine, the tripwire is going to be when you see the desolating sacrilege of the temple. So in other words, and what it ended up being with the Roman armies coming and putting all their standards and everything else all over the sacred districts. When you see that, that's when the temple's about to go down. That's when Israel's going to be destroyed. So get out. Because what would a loyal Jew do? We're going to go stay. Right? This is Jerusalem. This is our ground. This is the house of the Lord. We're going to defend this and protect this and everything else. He's trying to say what Christ is saying. Matthew's recounting what Christ is saying is, no, this is the judgment of God. It's not the power of Rome that's doing this. It's the judgment of God, because Israel was supposed to be the priests of the nations, and they failed that. It's going to show up in the parable of the talents. It's actually talking about Israel burying its priestly identity instead of actually going out and bearing fruit for the kingdom. And so now I don't using the wrath of God because that's so mistaken in our culture, but this is the judgment of God coming down in Jerusalem. You failed to bear fruit, so now the tree is going to wither. And the instrument of that is going to be Rome. And when this happens, there's no saving the temple. There's no sticking around. There's no remnant of Israel. They are going to destroy everything and everyone who's in Jerusalem. So as soon as you see them gathering around, get out. Don't stop. Don't pass go. Don't collect $500 or $200, whatever it is. You just go. And that's what he's going to say. He said, look, if they're in Judea, flee to the mountains. Let him who's on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to take his mantle. Because like if you were working out in the field, you take off your heavy cloak and you work, you don't get too sweaty. He's saying, look, you don't even have time to run over the corner of the field and grab your cloak and go. You just get out of Dodge. You go straight for the mountains. Hello. Lots of smelly feet today? Just one pair. Do you spritz them before you do your reflexology?
No, I feel like that would be really rude.
It would kind of be rude.
Yeah.
I'd burn a lot of incense in there probably. Anyway, so back to this. So he's saying, don't go back, don't go downstairs and grab your backpack. Was it the bug out bag? Don't go get your bug out bag. Just go. You don't have time. So, so the urgency of this. And alas, for those who are with child and for those who give suck in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. So now what he's talking about here is the urgency of running away is going to be so much so that a woman encumbered with an infant or a toddler is not going to be able to make it. And no woman's going to leave her child behind. If she's up on the rooftop and her child's downstairs, yeah, it's Matthew 24. We are on verse 20. Nobody's going to leave their child downstairs and take off. So they're going to get caught, is basically what he's saying. They're encumbered. So woe for them, alas for them. And then not be in winter, because in winter the wadis in Israel, there's all kinds of little valleys and things like that. They'd be swollen with water, and they wouldn't be able to cross them, and they'd be trapped, and it would be more difficult and more dangerous and everything else. And pray that's not on a Sabbath, is because on a Sabbath you're not allowed to walk very far. There's limitations and restrictions on your journey. So you have this moral conundrum, this pang of conscience. Do you run away, or are you faithful to the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath and end up being destroyed?
Have what do lawyers call it when
A loophole?
sets a precedent with Maccabees that they defend themselves on Sabbath.
Yeah, but again, to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, or the Pharisees and the rabbis and all these, are you supposed to? Are you not supposed to? Should we wait? Should we not wait? And even if they did go, other people wouldn't give them hospitality because they're breaking the Sabbath, and so it'd be a much more difficult journey. He's just saying, look, it's going to be more complicated, which is interesting because it means that Matthew's still interested in Sabbath regulations. So he hadn't completely abandoned those. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been shortened, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And he's basically just saying, if and he's talking about the no human being would be saved. He's not talking about cosmically. He's talking about in Judea. If God did not shorten the days of that invasion, the Romans would have killed all the Jews, and it would just completely eradicate them from the face of the earth. But God shortened the sake of the elect; those days will be shortened through the prayers of the Christians. Then if anyone says to you, lo, here's a Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Lo, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, lo, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, lo, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. So now he's saying, look, don't think it's going to come in secret. This guy's over there. He's out in the wilderness. He's training back there in Jericho. It's when I return, when the Son of Man comes, and now he's echoing Daniel. The Son of Man is the image in Daniel that's used very characteristically. So now the Son of Man is going to come, and he's going to judge the kingdoms and set his kingdom in Jerusalem and in Israel. So when he comes, it's not like he's going to be, hey, we've had the Messiah. He's down the street in this back alley. Come on in the back door and don't say anything to anybody. And it's not like that. And again, this happened. There were all kinds of false pretenders. There were all kinds of false messiahs saying that we will, that I am going to go destroy the Romans, and it never happened.
So when they ask these three questions, are they still asking any earthly questioning?
I mean, they don't really understand that Jesus is God, is the word, until after the resurrection. I mean, that's what we have on the road to Emmaus.
So when they're hearing all this, they're still thinking he's going to be coming back riding on a horse with them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, he's going to be enthroned as Messiah. So, and they're kind of already in that. And what is it going to look like, and how will we know that you're in power? And that's what's coming up next. But right now, he's talking about the fall of the temple. So, like I said, don't try to combine those things. Keep them separate for right now. Right now, this is all about the fall of the temple. And he really has 80-70 in mind. And a lot of it is because the Jews had made the temple the center of their worship, as opposed to the God of the temple being the center of their worship. And so the temple had become idolatrous in an odd way. And because it had become an idol, it had to be destroyed, so that they could then look past the house of the Lord to see the Lord. Oh, this eagles thing, in the ancient world, they didn't have a distinction between eagles and vultures, which is too bad because vultures are ugly and eagles are really cool. But if you see them fly, if you see a vulture flying and a hawk or an eagle flying, they look the same. I mean, they have the beautiful, they're beautiful birds. Just the faces of those turkey vultures are scary. So the idea, and by the way, the symbol of the Roman legions was an eagle. Well, that's Byzantine. But the legions was an eagle. So when you put all these flags around, all their pendants and standards, there's all these eagles gathered around the body. But also, the church fathers see this as an allegory, that wherever Christ is, there the saints will be kept together around him. So where the body of Christ is, the saints will be gathered around it. But anyway, his point in all of this is that the temple is going to be destroyed when the desolating sacrilege, when the Roman armies come in. When that happens, that's the end of Israel. Get out. The judgment of God is coming. There's nothing you can save. There's no way you're going to survive. Just get away. And we know from Josephus' history, Josephus, that they did. They fled to a mountain village. I forget the name of it. I saw it earlier today, but I can remember it. But they fled to this village and stayed there in 66. When the first Roman armies came, they retreated. They came back in 70 and wiped it out. And the Christians survived because they took off and they fled to the mountains. Now, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now, this is where things get kind of complicated and difficult, because the way that's almost always been read is that's the second coming, the parousia, when Christ returns. And I don't think it doesn't mean that, if that makes any sense. But I think it also has a more immediate meaning, and the more immediate meaning is the sign of the Son of Man. What's the sign of the Son of Man? When was Christ revealed in his glory? Well, yeah, but that was before. But when was he glorified? Father, glorify me as I was glorified with your glory before the ages. When we have the crucifixion, what does the church put on top of it? Not what was written there, but what does the church have on it? On the top of the cross. The King of glory. So when he was crucified on the cross is when his glory is shown. It's a big paradox in the faith. So some of the church fathers talk about, and St. John Chrysostom in particular talks about the sign of the Son of Man as a cross. Now, whether he hadn't envisioned that there was going to be a blazing white cross in the sky when Christ returned, I'm not sure. I think that's how most people interpret it. But I kind of wonder if they mean the crucifixion, that the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, because what happened when he was crucified? The sun was darkened from the 6th hour to the 9th hour. There was earthquakes and all these other things. So all these things happen. The powers of heaven will be shaken, and the tribes of earth will mourn. See the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. Now that's where it kind of breaks apart. But this question of coming on the clouds of heaven, is he coming down on the clouds of heaven, or is he coming ascending on the clouds of heaven? Because if you think of him coming ascending on the clouds of heaven, that's the ascension. He's returning into the kingdom. So I kind of wonder, and I don't know, and the church fathers aren't absolutely clear on this because they don't ask this question. So they talk about this more in allegorical terms and in symbolic terms. So they don't really talk about what this is. Is it an indication of what the parousia, the second coming, is going to be? Yes. Is it a blueprint for the way the second coming is going to happen? No. And the reason for that is because we're just not supposed to know. We're supposed to be faithful to Christ, follow his commandments, and wait on him. And that's what the rest of this chapter is going to be about. It's about patience and preparation. Be prepared and be patient. Just wait, just wait, just wait. When I come, you will know it. Don't guess. If you find yourself trying to figure it out, it's not me. Just wait. And so I wonder about this. Now, some of those commentators, the more modern ones, say, oh, well, he's not really talking about the sun and the moon. This is how people at that time talked about political powers. You know, the sun would have been Rome and, all these different powers. And so it's a lot of political turmoil. And I think that definitely, there was political turmoil. But this is, Christ's coming is a cosmic event. And so creation, of course, is going to be caught up in that event, and you're going to see agitation within the created order. So I think there's some kind of celestial, astronomical things going on, and the earth is shaken, and all these other things. But now we're talking about the Son of Man more. And the Son of Man, remember, goes all the way back to the beginning of Matthew, and it can be used to mean I. You know, it's just a fancy way of saying, I do this. Well, the Son of Man does this. Or it could also be a messianic title when it's referring back to Daniel. He definitely has Daniel in mind. So he's talking about the Messiah. This is answering their second question. How will we know when you've been enthroned with power? You know, and he's saying, you'll know. Don't worry about it. It's going to be really obvious. Just relax. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender, puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Now this becomes, first the image is a fig tree. Fig trees lose their leaves in the winter, and then their shoots come out in the spring. You know, so they don't have fruit until later on, but their leaves come out. So you know it's almost summer when the fig tree starts to send out leaves. Saying, you guys know how to read these signs. This is what I'm telling you about. It's not summer, but it's about to be summer. All these signs that you're used to are just like the shoots of leaves coming off the fig tree. Now you kind of hit that, like if you go skiing, you go over the edge, and now you can't stop. You've gone over the edge, and it's going to start moving forward. But it becomes problematic because this generation will not pass away, and heaven and earth will not pass away, my words will not pass away. Well, then, you know, by the time Matthew's writing this, Jesus hasn't come back. It's been another year, you know. And I actually had one of my college students very poignantly said to me, it actually really tugged at my heart. She was really depressed and upset after Easter last year. I'm like, what's going on? She said, we've had another Easter, we've gone through another year, and he's still not back. And that really, it meant so much to me, because I was like, she really... That's an it should be. It's a Christian expectation. Where is he? He said he was coming back. You're going to hear them work through that in the rest of these parables, because the master's always delayed in returning. So with the 10 virgins, he's delayed in coming. With the talents, he's delayed in coming. You know, all these things, there's this delay in coming. And Christ is saying, have patience, relax. The end will come when the end comes. But you just be prepared. And you just do what I've told you to do, and everything's going to work out okay. But of that day and hour, no one knows. And I wish more people would read this. Not even the angels of heaven, not the Son, but the Father only. So all this speculation about the end of times and when it's going to be and what's going to look like, Christ just says point blank, don't worry about it. That's not what's important. What's important is being patient, being prepared, and keeping my commandments. And when I come, I'll come. But you do what you're supposed to do, because as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. So the image of this is everybody's kind of hanging out. Everything's fine, you know, eat, drink, and be merry. People are having parties. They're chilling out. They're having barbecues on Memorial Day. You know, they're going out boating. And then all of a sudden, this flood comes and wipes out everything.
Makes me feel like God's just waiting until like the majority of people are
bad.
paying attention.
I know
to their
exactly.
worst hours.
Got it.
Okay,
Now, no, but that's not
and
what it's
I'm
going
only
to
going
be.
to say these 5 people.
Well, no, because people were wicked. They'd actually completely fallen away from God, and they were teaching wickedness. So how did the children ever come to righteousness if they're raised in the midst of iniquity? You know. So I mean, but anyway. The point here is it's so unexpected. There's no, the people who are completely ignorant of the life of God just go blissfully unaware of their lives. And by the way, it doesn't seem too distinct from what's going on in our culture right now. And so when what happened is the flood came, and Noah and his family were preserved, but then everybody else in the midst of their lives, unexpectedly, this judgment came upon them. Now, keep that in mind. Who was taken away in that scenario? The good people, the righteous people, or the wicked, non-righteous people?
Taken away by the flood.
Taken away by the flood.
Happy.
Right. So taken away were the people upon whom judgment was rendered. The people who remained were the people who were not judged. or we're not judged unworthy, whatever. Okay. Keep that in mind because this is where a big mistake is made. All right. So will be the coming Son of Man. Then 2 men will be left in the field. One is taken and one is left. 2 women will be grinding in the mill. One is taken and one is left. Now, a lot of people think about this as the rapture, right? And so in their mind, the one who's taken goes to heaven and the one who's left has to stay here for the tribulation. What's the dynamic here in Scripture, though? Which he just said, we're going by the example of Noah, right? The one who are taken are the ones who are being swept up in judgment. So you want to be the guy left behind. You don't want to be the one who just disappears in the midst of this judgment. The judgment is to take away the people and to place them in the place that was prepared for the devil and all of his angels. That's not a good thing. You want to be the guy left behind going, what just happened? Right? So keep that in mind. This isn't talking about rapture. It's clearly not part of scriptural teaching. So watch therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So there's the what do you call it? Aesop's fables. The moral. That's the moral of the story right there. That's what they're talking about. Watch therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this: if the householder had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have watched and would have not let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready. So see that? Be ready at all times. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So they're asking, when's this end of age going to come? He's like, you don't know. There's going to be these signs when the Son of Man is enthroned. You will not know when the end of the world is coming. Nobody's going to give you. There's no signs I can give you. I don't even know. I can't even describe it to you. So you must live your life at all times as though the end is imminent. But it may not be. But you need to be prepared. You need to be patient. You need to keep my commandments. Those are things that need to be done. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? When you talk about masters and servants in Scripture, who are you talking about? Who's the master? Always God for the Jews. Christ, of course, but God. And then who are the servants? Always Israel, right? So now, so keep that in mind. God and Israel. God has said, who is the faithful and wise servant whom his master set over his household to give them their food in proper time? Why did God bless Israel through Abraham? Do you remember? You're just teaching this, right?
Yeah.
In Genesis?
Because he was.
When he says, I will make of you many nations, so that. That's really important. Do you remember the so that? Your descendants will be so numerous as the stars, and I will bless you, so that.
So that I will be their God.
And I'll be their God and bless them, so that the nations will be blessed through them. So Israel was actually given a priestly role amongst the nations. And Israel was supposed to minister to the nations and reveal to them the light of God and invite them into the worship of God. And yet what they do, because they were there's lots of reasons historically they were persecuted, they were dead and everything else. Instead of being a light and a beacon, either they fell into apostasy and worshipped, the Asheroth or Baal or whatever, or they became very insular and said, you guys are all bad pagans, you're Gentiles, we don't have anything to do with you, we're going to sit in here, we're going to curl up in our own little ball, and we're going to have our faith, and don't bother us and don't talk to us. So they failed in their mission. So Christ said, the master set over his household, which is creation, so that you could feed it, so you can care for it, right? So blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with the drunken, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, an hour he does not know, and will punish him and put him with the hypocrites. There men will weep and gnash their teeth.
Mine says he will cut him into pieces.
It is. That's actually technically what it says. He'll cut him into pieces because for two things, right? He'll cut him into pieces because that was actually the legal punishment for a criminal. The criminals were cut up. And then the church fathers actually look at that allegorically. The Spirit of God will be cut off from them. They'll be cut into pieces. They'll be cut away from the living vine. So they're taken apart. But yes, that's actually he'll punish them. cut him in pieces. That's what my note says here. So you guys see how he's talking about it? So again, they were given a mission, do the mission. We're not sure when you're coming back. Doesn't matter, do the mission. Be faithful. Well, what if it's going to be a little bit longer than we thought? Don't go get drunk. Don't go beat people up. Don't take advantage of people. Don't throw your weight around and abuse your authority. You just go and you love who you're supposed to love. Their men will weep and gnash their teeth, for they're thrown out of the household. They've been cast out of the kingdom. Okay? What you do in secret reveals who you truly are. So whatever you do when master isn't there is really who truly you are, and God's going to reveal that. Are we doing okay so far? Because I'm flying through this. Okay, so now we're to chapter 25. So what he's done so far is he's set up, they're asking, when is the temple going to fall? When will you be revealed as Messiah, and when will the end of the age be? And he said, the temple's going to fall when the Roman armies show up. You've read Daniel. Look at those prophecies. Those are all the signs you need to know. When you see it, get out of Dodge, because Israel's going to fall. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. There's nothing you can do about it. You need to be somewhere else. And then when I come, it'll be obvious. It'll be from the east to the west. There's not going to be anything in secret. It'll be clear. It'll be public. It'll be easy to see, and I'll be enthroned at the right hand of the Father. And you don't know when the end of age comes. I don't know when the end of the age is coming, but be faithful up until that time. Okay, we're all caught up with that. And then he gives these parables. He tells them what the end of times. He tells them what they need to know about the end of times. And maybe that's the interesting thing to keep in mind. We get caught up in wanting to know all these things about the end of times. God isn't interested in us knowing all the things about the end of times, probably because we would panic and wouldn't understand it, and we would just get all crazy anyway. He only tells us what we need to know. And honestly, we don't need to know anything about the end of times. We just need to know how we should be behaving when the end of times comes upon us. Does that make sense? So he's not really interested in giving us Bible codes so we can figure out that this is going to be the time, that's going to be the whatever. He's saying, look, you behave this way, and when the end comes, you'll be prepared. And so we jump right into the parable of the maidens. The kingdom of heaven shall be compared to 10 maidens who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. Now this goes back to Proverbs. Remember, Proverbs kind of personifies wisdom and foolishness. They're 2 women. And and wisdom is calling out and saying, follow the teaching of your mothers and fathers, and be wise and prudent, all this other stuff. And then the foolishness, mistress foolishness, is saying, hey, come over here and hang out with me, and always trying to tempt and draw him away. And it's kind of depicted almost as a harlot. So these 2 dichotomies of wise and foolish run through very much Jewish literature. And so Christ is going to use that now. He's going to say, look, you guys are always talking about law, foolishness, and wisdom. I'm going to show you how that plays out. If you're going to approach the end of times foolishly, this is how you do it. If you're going to approach the end of times wise, then this is how you're going to do it. With wisdom, that's how you're going to do it. So we're going to slow down. I'm tripping over my words. So it's a contrast between them. So the wise are those who recognize God's kingdom. The foolish are those who are blinded to God's kingdom. So you have 5 foolish, 5 wise virgins. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. So you guys know what that looks like. You got a little vigil lamp, a little wick, and you put oil in there and it burns, and your wick gets all crusty with all the carbonization. You pull that out and put another one in there, and you got to fill it up with oil, and you can light it, and it's going to hold. So the wise virgins took their oil lamp with a flask of oil. So when that one ran out, they could pour it in there, and then they'd be set for another however many hours. The foolish virgins just showed up with whatever. Now, I've always read this and thought that it was almost kind of like this harem thing, like he was going to pick one of these girls. These are like bridesmaids. These aren't the bride. He's gone off. The bridegroom is off with the bride. It's funny because different commentators look at it as either they're at the bride's household waiting for him to come home, or they're at the bridegroom's household waiting for them to come home, or they're at the bride's house waiting for him to get there. Because what would happen is, in the Middle East still today, the way marriage customs are set up is the groom would leave his father's house and come to the bride's house, complete the contract, make sure that everything's signed and dotted and everything, whatever, how they do that with the bride's father. And then she'd be given in marriage. and then he would go back to his house. There'd be parties all along the way. So there's plenty of opportunities for him to get delayed somewhere. So whether he was delayed in getting to her house or delayed in returning with her to the house doesn't really matter. There were these 10 bridesmaids, whether they were bridesmaids chosen by the bride who were waiting at the bride's house, or if they were bridesmaids and they were relatives of the groom waiting for him to return so they could welcome him in and have the big party. It's just there's these 10, not 12, I keep saying 12, doing that, these 10 bridesmaids, maidens, who are there to participate in the wedding feast. And he's delayed. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept, which is interesting because he says, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour, and don't fall asleep. But they all fell asleep. Anyway, they fall asleep and they slept. And at midnight there was a cry. So somebody out in the street said, behold, the bridegroom, come out to meet him. So he's on his way. He's going to get here soon. It's time. Let's all go. Then all those maidens rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, our oil's kind of low. Can you help us out? Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise replied, perhaps there will not be enough for us and for you. Go rather to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. Which seems kind of mean. It's midnight, right? We're like, come on, guys. But in a little village during a wedding ceremony, the oil dealer was probably up anyway. So it's probably just saying, hey, go get some. And, I've preached on this sometimes before. We kind of look at this, especially as Christians, be like, you're supposed to share. It's not nice. That's not what the parable is about. It's about being prepared. It's about, and different church fathers will allegorize this. What is the oil in the lamp? Is it good works? Is it charity? Is it love? Is it humility? And of course, you can fold all that into the parable. But the actual point of the parable is some of them were prepared, some of them weren't prepared. That's it. It's about what I told you about, these three things. Be prepared, be patient, and keep my commandments. So this parable is hitting that first, prepared. Make sure you have extra oil. Make sure you have your bug out bag. You've got enough for 72 hours to get wherever you need to get. That's what he's saying. Just be prepared. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. And afterward the other maidens came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he replied, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. So it's about being ready. And here, people try to press the parable. Oh, well, they were his kinsmen. He would have known them. He wouldn't say, I don't know you. That's not the point of the parable. They're just setting up this dynamic that the people who had oil and were prepared got to go into the feast, which is, of course, an image of the kingdom. And those who didn't have the oil weren't prepared and didn't get to go in the kingdom. You can't really draw much more besides that. Although you can overlay this with a lot of allegory and a lot of kind of teachings like the fathers do. And that way you can apply it to your own life. But it's pretty straightforward for us, especially for people who live in a pretty unprepared way, spiritually anyway. I can go to church later. I can discover my faith later. I can express this later. And he's saying, you don't know if there's going to be a later. Do it now and be prepared. And again, so the kingdom of heaven, for it will be as when a man going on a journey called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. Okay, so now he's going away. And so there's an image of Christ's ascension in this. And then, of course, his Pharisee is coming back. Now, 5 talents. Did anybody in their notes tell you how much 5 talents is? It's not actually a coin. It's a measure. It's a weight.
A talent was worth more than 15 years' wages of labor.
Right? Okay, so denarius is 1 day's labor. Okay? So there's probably about, 30,000 denarii in a talent. That's the weight of them. So a talent is not something to be carrying on your pocket. It's about $640,000. So if you figure the average household income in Iredell County is something like right under 40,000, I think. So if you take that and you go 30 years, you're talking about $640,000, something like that, or whatever I did. No, for 15 years, it's $640,000. 5 talents is $3 million. 2 talents is like $1 million, $1.2 million, and then of course a talent is 600. So this isn't a small amount. This is massive. You can do a lot with that kind of money. So the idea is that this is an immense sum of money that he's entrusting to them to do something with it. But it is money too, by the way. We kind of think of talent as, we've got our talents that we can do and my skills and everything. That word talent, one of the commentators are saying actually comes from this parable. I'm not sure. I didn't do the etymology myself, but But don't lose sight of that. He's talking about this monetary investment. So he gives 5 talents, 2 and 1 to each according to his ability, and went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once, traded with them, made 5 talents more. So also he who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, when's the kingdom of God coming? After a long time. After a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing the 5 talents more, saying, you can almost see him kind of puffing up his chest. Check this out. You gave me 3 mil. There's another 3 mil. 100% return on your investment. Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I've made 5 talents more. His master very joyfully says to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. What does he mean by enter into the joy of your master? It's really obvious, and it's way more. Yeah, well, that's what we think. Well, the joy. He just made this dude $3 million. So what's going to happen in the master's household? I'm party, but now he's even more wealthy. He's got more. His standard of living is going to go up. So what's he going to do with this servant? Come participate in the exalted life which I will now be able to have because you were faithful with what I gave to you. You have increased my bounty. I am joyful because look at the lifestyle I get to live now, and you get to be a part of it. Come and enter into the joy of the master. You participate in my joy. Kind of cool when you think about it that way, right? And so then the second, pretty much the same thing. Also, who had the 2 talents came forward saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I say you were much. Enter in the joy of your master. Exact same words. Does the amount matter? No, it was the effort that he put in. And so he extended the wealth of his master. He was able to do what his master asked. He also had received the 1 talent, came forward, probably not quite as excited, saying, Master, and I love this. He knows he screwed up. He knows he messed up because here comes I don't know, we'll say Father Dalber down at St. Eutharios. He comes up, he goes, here's the 5 talents you gave me, Master. I give you 5 more. And then Father Angelo from Holy Trinity goes, here's the 2 talents. I gave you 2 talents more. And then I come walking up, I'm like, oops, I was supposed to do something with that. I was like, huh. And his excuse, right? His excuse is, I didn't know if I could do anything with him. I was scared, so I didn't do anything. Well, this is on the heels of 2 guys that just doubled what he gave them. So he's obviously has no excuse. There's nowhere to hide. He's completely been exposed. And so now he comes with his tail tucked. He's like, oh, Master. And so what's his response? I really screwed up. I was afraid. I gave into my fear. And I stuck my head in the sand and hid. Is that what he says? No, he says, Master, I knew you were a jerk. Really? This is how you're going to get off the hook? You're going to like call out the master and be like, you reap where you don't sow, and you're irresponsible, and you leave it all to us, and blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like going, really? So it's very interesting. So keep that in mind. I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not winnow. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. Wow. Thank you for giving me what is mine, right? And so the master, he's like, oh, is that how we're going to play things? His master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. He doesn't try to argue with him about his characterization of him, whether it's true or not, totally irrelevant to the parable. You knew, according to you, in other words, you knew that I reap where I don't sow, and you gather where I have not winnowed. Oh, okay, so assume that's true. Let's forget about defending my character in the face of your mean accusations. Assume it's true. You knew that I was hard. You knew that I reaped where I didn't sow, that I winnowed where I didn't, or I gathered where I didn't winnow. Then you ought to have, at the very least, you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, the money changers. And at my coming, I should have received what was my own. He said, here you have what is your own. He said, I should receive what is my own with interest. So you robbed from me because you didn't even go stick it into some kind of money market CD for 0.5%. Excuse me, for 0.5% interest, which is terrible. We can't get any good interest on any kind of savings bonds or anything. It's ridiculous. But you at the very least could have done that if you were so scared. Basically, you've got no excuse. You were just lazy. You were just a bum. You just wasted your time. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, he will have abundance, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, there men will weep and gnash their teeth. A lot of weeping and gnashing their teeth in this. So what did the faithful servants, what did they get? You get to come live in the more lavish lifestyle that I get to experience now because you participated in it, you engaged it, now you've increased it, and now you get to be part of this. You who didn't do anything to participate in it, you get kicked out of the household. So it's not necessarily condemnation. It's not hell in vision here, although that language reflects the idea of punishment, but it's you are outside of the household now. You're done.
So he gets to look in the window and watch them party and have food, and he's like,
oops, should have done something more. Now, obviously, I mean, the main message of this parable is very clearly, you do what you're told. He says, go and do something with this money. Go and do it, right? So remember those three things. Be patient, be prepared, and keep my commandments. So the master gave him a job to do. Do your job. So for the Christians, Christ is telling his disciples, he says, look, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what kind of tribulations, everything are going to come upon the world. Don't worry about all that stuff. Don't try to read the signs. Don't try to figure it out. Don't try to get the code and everything else. You just be faithful. And the job I'm going to give you, and we, of course, we're going to find that out in chapter 28, is go out to all nations and baptize them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teach them to keep the commandments, and lo, I'll be with you the end of the ages. Okay, so we got the Great Commission coming up. That's going to be their job. But you do your job. Don't worry about all this other stuff. You do your job. Do what I have set you to do. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Be patient, be prepared, and do what I've told you to do. Follow your mission, whatever else is going on around you. Okay, don't get scared and stick your head in the sand. You keep doing your mission. In the background of this, though, and this is why I started off talking about Abraham, what was the mission that was given to Israel that I just told you about? What was Israel supposed to do? Did they? They took that faith and they used it to exclude the Gentiles and to wall themselves off from the nations and to sit there in almost a kind of prideful triumphalism saying, we are the people of God and the chosen people, and you guys are dirty goyim that we have to dust our feet off when we come back into Israel, right? So which one of the three are they? They literally buried their priestly office. Instead of going out to the nations and caring for them, they turned it inward and hid the talent so that it couldn't give the light of Christ or the light of God. At that point, they didn't recognize Christ. Okay? So this is also a little bit of a condemnation about what's going on with Israel. So when the Son of Man comes in glory, and then we, of course, right at 8. We'll go about 10 minutes long. Sorry, everybody. So weep and gnash their teeth. Are we okay to that?
It's 8 o'clock.
I know. I saw the clock already. I had my computer open at home one time, and all of a sudden, and Zach was sitting at the table eating, I think, a snack or something, and I was in the kitchen doing something. All of a sudden, the computer goes, it is 4 o'clock, or whatever time it was. It's 4 o'clock. Zach's like, who said that, Daddy? Who said it? It's a computer. He's like, why is your computer telling you what time it is? Anyway, not to get off track too much. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. So now we're going to do the parable of the last judgment. Now it's very interesting, and I'm going to talk to you. I'm a little bit confused by this, so you guys are going to have to be confused with me. But it's very cool. It's a very cool confusion. So we've gone through this whole thing so far, and it's basically Christ saying, be prepared, do what I've commanded of you, and I will come. And then you've got this thing about the talents, which ends up with Israel, this kind of secondary thing I told you about, Israel having failed to minister to Gentiles. So the question kind of floats up, well, what about the Gentiles? What's going to happen with them? I'm going to toss that out there, just kind of a little preparation. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and he'll place the sheep at his right hand and the goats on the left. So we've heard this. We know this parable. We talk about this parable all the time. Now, why does he separate sheep and goats? In Palestine, even I think today they still do it. You have mixed flocks. So you have goats, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell them apart. But the sheep are hardier, and they would rather sleep outdoors, whereas the goats need to be kind of clustered together and for the warmth. So they're not quite as hardy in that environment. So at the end of the day, you would have to bring the flocks in and separate them out, goats and sheep, goats and sheep, goats and sheep, goats and sheep. So that's the dynamic that's in the mind right now. This is a very pastoral example that they would have all identified with. You know, the shepherd out there being like, okay, over here, and we got to get this, and we got to get everybody put in the right group. And they've got one on the right, one on the left. Now, also in Judaism at this time, there was an idea of judgment. Let me see where, if I took notes on where, no, I didn't take actually working, but the judgment comes from places like there's passages in Ezekiel, there's passages in Isaiah, and I think there's passages in Daniel, which talks about Israel judging the nations. And the idea is that when God returns, when Messiah, really through the person of Messiah, all the nations of the world will be gathered together to be judged by Messiah. Now, it's very interesting too, and I'm dropping little hints about where I'm going to go with this, but if you look at when Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he says, you will be placed on 12 thrones to judge Israel. Okay, so who are the disciples going to judge? Israel, right? Who's going to judge everybody else?
Right.
That's the Messiah's job. The Messiah is going to judge the nations. The disciples will get to judge Israel. And so there's this idea of kind of a dual judgment, that Israel will be judged by the disciples, by the 12 apostles, and the Gentiles, the rest of the world, will be judged by the Messiah. Kind of interesting. I'm not sure if I follow this or not, but these are kind of, it's those things are definitely there. I mean, that's definitely part of Scripture, part of the tradition. So you've got kind of this idea of Israel's judgment being something distinct from the Gentiles' judgment. Okay? And the Jewish idea of judgment is that the nations will be gathered and they will be judged on how they treated Israel. So those nations which subjugated Israel, so Rome, Babylon, Assyria, they're in bad shape. Those are the ones that the judgment of God will come down upon. Those that did not persecute or subjugate Israel, those who were their allies or who treated them kindly or nicely, those would be spared judgment. So basically, the judgment is the Messiah will condemn those who have treated Israel harshly. That's the idea that's the idea of the messianic judgment within the mind of the Jews at the time of Jesus. That when Messiah came, he would gather all the nations, and those who had been bad to Israel would be punished, and those who had been good to Israel would be rewarded. You got that?
So that was their idea.
That was a Jewish idea. That was a Jewish idea, exactly. Yeah, that was the idea that was current in the minds of all these people. So when Jesus is saying this, that's the background you have to have in your head, because that's what they were used to hearing. But he's going to change it, okay? So before when we gathered the sheep and the goats, okay, so we're talking about judgment. We got it. So now the nations have been gathered. The Messiah is standing in front of them. He's got the good guys. He's got the bad guys. Let's see what happens, okay? So then the king will say to those at his right hand, come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Those are the good guys. They're righteous. They get the kingdom. Of course, that's what's going to happen. This is all in line with the Jewish expectation at that point, okay? You come into the kingdom. Hoorah. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. This is where they all go, what? Wait a second. It's supposed to be Israel. You know, how do you treat Israel? And he's like, no, this is, you clothed me, you took care of me, you did these things. So it's these acts of mercy, these acts of kindness. And then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see thee a stranger and welcome thee, or naked and clothe thee? And they go through the whole thing. He builds up all the anticipation. And when did we see you sick in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. So who's he talking about? Who are the least of these, my brethren? Poor people, homeless people, marginalized people, the tax collectors, the harlots, the widows, the orphans, all this stuff, right? That's kind of how I've always read that. Matthew's very clear about who Jesus' brothers and sisters are when he says, my brethren. Who does Jesus say his brethren are? Right? So you go all the way back in the beginning where they say, oh, your mother and your brothers are there. He says, my mother and my brothers and sisters are those who hear the word of God and keep it and follow it. Who are the people who heard the word of God and kept it? No. At this point, the disciples, the Christians, right? This is where I kind of shake my head a little bit because we've all been raised to read this as whatever you do to a poor person out on the street or this or that or the other, then that's how you're ministering to Christ. And I'm not saying that's not the case. I think it is the case. But I'm saying in the context of Matthew, I'm not entirely sure that's what's going on.
So just take care of the Christian?
What he's saying is that the Gentiles will be judged by how they interact with the followers of Christ, with Christ's disciples. So remember, in the Jewish mind and judgment, the Messiah is going to judge them by how they treated Israel. And those who were good to Israel will be rewarded, and those who were persecuted and subjugated Israel will be punished. So Christ is saying, whatever you did to one of these little ones, and by the way, Matthew uses that phrase, these little ones, all the time to refer only to his disciples. And in other places in Scripture where he talks about brethren, he clarifies, my brothers and sisters are these. So I'm not saying I buy that, but I want to throw it out there because I think there's some insight there too. And I think that flows with what Matthew's argument is here. Is he's saying, look, you're so worried about judgment, you're so worried about this, and then, okay, well, the Jews hid their talent from the Gentiles. Well, how are the Gentiles going to be judged? The Gentiles are going to be judged by how they have cared for the people who are in their midst, how they treat you when you come to them. Are they welcoming to you? Are they kind to you? They show you hospitality? How do they treat you? And that's where their judgment will come from. And by the way, those who treat them badly, we'll kind of skip ahead. I don't need to read the whole thing because you all know the parables so well. They're going to be punished.
So it would be following along the lines of the Good Samaritan. The priest passed him by because they were too busy being holy, or the Samaritan took the time out.
Well, it's kind of it's reversed. Exactly, it's reversed because the Samaritan who wasn't supposed to act that way then was kind to it. So there's salvation there. Now, I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to confuse everybody, even though I'm still trying to process this whole thing in my own head. The church fathers, when I went back to John Chrysostom, to St. John Chrysostom, and to some of the others, it's kind of a little bit murky, Now, they always talk about this in terms of how do you apply it to your life, okay? But they're never very clear. I mean, if you read with this question in mind, they don't give a definitive answer, whose judgment it is. But now here's the thing. If Gentiles who've never known Christ are going to be judged by the kindness they give to the most marginalized and weak among them, how much more so are we going to be judged by how we care for the weak and the marginalized among us? Does that make sense? Our judgment is certainly not going to be any easier than the Gentiles' judgment, the non-Christians' judgment. Our judgment, having the full revelation of Christ, love one another, love one another. So I don't think you can dismiss the way this has been used homiletically. I think I'll probably still always preach it that way because that's what impacts us the most. But look at the flow of what Matthew's doing here. And what he's saying is, everybody's asking about the end of times, what's judgment going to look like and everything else. And basically he's saying, don't worry about it. And then all of a sudden he says, this is what it's going to look like. It doesn't really flow, right? He's saying, don't worry about it. You worry about being faithful to me. And I will take care of those who aren't faithful to me. And those who have treated you with kindness, then we're going to be gentle with them. And those who have not, then they get to deal with the consequences of that. So you kind of got that element floating in there as well. But like I said, I'll read through it real quickly. This is not to say that we shouldn't clothe the naked and visit the sick and those in prison. And by the way, all the church fathers, when they deal with this passage, apply it to how we take care of those most marginalized and weak, and the poor. I'm just not so sure that this is that this was meant to be a blueprint for us to kind of create a report card for what our judgment's going to look like. As a matter of fact, I think that's kind of a little bit, not quite the opposite, but that's a little bit missing the point. What Christ is saying is, don't worry about the report card. Christianity isn't a test. There's not going to be a final exam. I'm not going to sit there and have my list of things that you do this, do you do that. I think that's the misuse of this passage. That's kind of what I'm bringing all this up to kind of break us away from that. It's, have you been patient? Have you been prepared? And have you done what I asked you to do? Have you kept my commandments? In other places, in plenty of other places, he says, care for the needy, take care of the orphans, the widows, make sure that you care for the lepers and the marginalized and everybody else. But that might not exactly be what this is talking about. Then he'll say to those with his left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, this is the other last point I'm going to make, and then we're about 15 minutes over, so I'm going to stop. What does he say to those at his right hand? Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for who? No. Look at verse 34. The king will say to those at his right hand, come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom for you. So who is the kingdom of heaven prepared for? Us, right? The kingdom of heaven was prepared for humanity. And I think this is a really interesting insight. Now skip down to verse 41. Then he'll say to those at his left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for? Did he prepare the eternal fire for humanity? Did he prepare for sinner to punish them? Right? It's kind of interesting. What was created for humanity was paradise, was the kingdom of heaven. This other was never prepared for humanity. But if we don't engage our faith and do what we're asked to do, patient, prepared, and keep his commandments, then we'll depart into the fire that was not prepared for us, but it was prepared for the devil's angels. I was hungry, you gave me no food; thirsty, you gave me no drink; stranger, you did not welcome me; naked, you did not clothe me; sick in prison, you did not visit me. And they answer, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison? Did not mention you. And he said to them, truly I say to you, as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, the righteous into eternal life.
I was wondering, why doesn't God just let people cease to exist instead of just really, eternal punishment, really?
Well, you're going to draw me off into a whole other conversation about it. Now remember, we don't read these things as literal blueprints for how things are going to happen. We're not literalists when we come to this stuff. There's obviously this, we just read it, this string that talks about punishment. And in aeonia, so unto the ages. But we don't really know what that means. All we know is that if we keep the commandments of God, we'll enter into his kingdom. If we don't keep the commandments of God, we'll be cast out of his kingdom. So it's like, why did he let us cease to exist as eternal punishment? Again, and this isn't from this passage, but the Orthodox teaching has always been that God does not punish us. Right?
The word punishment is in the Bible.
Sure it is, but God doesn't punish us.
So we punish ourselves.
We punish ourselves. And I know it sounds like semantics and, just isn't that convenient that you can do that.
Oh, I didn't do that.
Well, no.
Do it to yourself.
Well, but it is. Think about it. I'm trying to think of a good analogy because I wasn't thinking about this part. Use a small child, right? Don't touch the fire; it's hot. And so what they all go do?
They all touch
Stick your hand in the fire, right?
And then it's like,
are you causing the fire?
Okay, I'm gonna strap your hand down to the fire.
No, that's not what he's saying.
That's what I'm getting from.
That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, in a larger sense, don't live your life that way, because it will lead to consequences that are unpleasant. And when you go live your life that way, it leads to consequences that are unpleasant. The idea of hell in Orthodoxy is not that you're in this fiery place with a bunch of guys with pitchforks and little ponytails, and they're all holding food up over you, and every time you reach down, like Tantalus and Sisyphus and everything else. That's a Greek mythological thing, or the medieval kind of Dante's image of the 9 layers of hell and all this other stuff. That's all much later additions, and it's mostly kind of poetic, imaginative kind of stuff. The tradition in Christianity, the core tradition, has never been all these kind of demonic images. It's that you are choosing how to live your life. The best example I can give, and I know I've told you this before, is if it turns out that heaven is underwater and I haven't learned how to breathe underwater, then it's going to be a pretty unpleasant experience for me. Right? Heaven's underwater. You have to acclimate yourself to living a different sort of life. So if you do that effort in this life, then you will experience it as paradise. If you refuse to, because you're like, I don't need to get ready for that, I'm fine just the way I am, everything's okay, then when you get there and all of a sudden, and what the water is the love of God.
We won't get there, so we put in that other place.
Yeah, we've never seen it as two geographic areas. We actually remember the fire of hell is the love of God. It's actually the same thing. We will all be in heaven. Some of us will inherit the kingdom of heaven, and the rest of us will experience it as torment. Because the love of God will be everywhere present, filling all things as it is, but then it'll be in a more, I don't know, substantial way is the right word to say it. So it's the same thing. If I decide I don't want to breathe air, my only choice is to hold my breath, and that doesn't feel good over the course of eternity. But those who are open to the breath of God will experience it as bliss and joy and everything else. For those of us who have turned ourselves off to that and said, I don't want to take that risk, I don't want to go outside of myself, I want to hide my own little, core of where I can protect myself under my little walls, then when you get to a place where your walls are stripped from you, whether you like it or not, you're not going to like it.
Well, it wouldn't be so bad if other people were saying no.
I know. And so working out our
And then
salvation in the midst of other
nobody
people doing it is yeah, exactly. Well, we should probably leave on that because we're over. But anyway, thank you all for your patience. I see some of us stayed, a couple of us dropped off. That's okay. There's a question hidden way down here at the bottom. At which stage does the bridegroom get shaved at home before or after the contract signing? That's just Greg Machopoulos. You need to be shaved. I was told on the day of our wedding I need to get shaved or else. And I just put that out over the whole internet, Greg. Now everybody knows. I know. No, we're not going to be shaving anybody in anybody's house right now. So let's finish up. We'll just sing this song. I'm off track. And we'll go from there. Christos anesti ek nekron thanato thanaton patisas ketis entis nimasi zoin charistamenos. Lord Jesus Christ, your God, please watch over these your servants, grant them safe passage at home, guide them, protect them, lead them to every good work for your holy name, forever in the ages of ages. Amen. And I know all that stuff is confusing. I'm sorry, but I just kind of want those ideas to percolate in your head. We can talk about them a little bit as we go forward. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a wonderful evening. I'll talk with you later. God bless you.
I have to brag on